Have you ever stopped to think about the real price of betrayal? I'm not just talking about the end of a relationship or the pain it causes, but the deep impact it has on our very souls. Clara's story, as she found herself lost in a setting of frozen mountains and a forbidden love, brings to light a reality many prefer to ignore. The consequences of infidelity are not simple and often are irreparable. After all, what is worth more? The desire to experience a consuming passion that destroys everything in its path, or the security of a stable life that, however, feels colorless and soulless? In this scenario, Clara faces a situation that could happen to any of us. As she gets lost in a clandestine romance with Esteban, she believes she can have the best of both worlds. But, as you will see, betrayal comes at a price far greater than she ever imagined. Guilt, regret, and emotional devastation are just the beginning of a process that changes lives forever. Once the truth comes to light, there is no turning back, and the pain of loss becomes almost unbearable. This is the starting point of a journey of self-discovery and painful consequences. Here, we will explore the depths of a story of infidelity that reveals not only the effects of betrayal, but also the challenges we face when trying to deal with our own choices. And most importantly, how you can apply these lessons to avoid the same fate. Clara moved to the mountains of Patagonia with one goal: to find a new beginning, far from the pressures and routine that married life imposed on her. But little did she know that what was about to happen would not be a simple reunion with nature, but an encounter with the unknown. The heat between her and Esteban, a mysterious local guide, was undeniable from the first glance. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore the attraction, fate seemed to have other plans, placing her in a situation as risky as it was tempting. A story of infidelity began to take shape there, in an isolated place, immersed in the cold of the mountains. As Clara and Esteban started talking, the tension between them grew. Every exchanged word, every shy smile, seemed to fuel the fire that was igniting between them. The guilt was palpable because Clara knew she was breaking the rules of her marriage with Ricardo, but the magnetism of Esteban was becoming harder and harder to resist. What once seemed like a simple friendship was now taking on a much darker and more seductive form. This forbidden attraction was about to change Clara's life forever, and she felt powerless before what was happening. How could she handle this situation? Clara already felt the weight of being married, and now, in front of Esteban, she found herself in an internal conflict of immense proportions. The risk of betrayal no longer seemed so distant. After all, when we stand on the edge of something forbidden, the line between right and wrong tends to blur, and desire begins to speak louder. The situation was clear. Clara was about to enter a path of no return, where her fidelity, her marriage, and her own emotions would collide in a devastating way. In the following days, Clara and Esteban's encounters became more frequent, and the tension between them seemed to be present in every corner of Patagonia. The conversations, once casual, started gaining an unexpected depth. Clara, who had tried to keep her distance, felt increasingly drawn to Esteban. The warmth that radiated from him was not just physical. It was a silent invitation to dive into the forbidden, a challenge to morality and fidelity. She knew she was flirting with danger, but desire, that uncontrollable force, was taking up more space in her mind. On a rainy night, as the mountain mist seemed to embrace the landscape, something changed. The first kiss, furtive and unexpected, happened. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the mark of a new path, where fear and excitement intertwined. Clara found herself lost in that moment, unsure of what to do with the storm of emotions that overwhelmed her. The feeling was of being dragged into something she could no longer control. The kiss wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise of something bigger, something dangerous, something she already knew she couldn't avoid anymore. And so, temptation intensified. Clara, torn between loyalty to her husband and the irresistible attraction to Esteban, found herself at an emotional crossroads. What should one do when caught in the grip of an overwhelming passion that consumes everything around it? The encounters that once seemed innocent were now spaces where the truth of betrayal began to take shape. She knew she was crossing a line, but the consequences felt so distant compared to the intensity of the moment. As days passed, Clara became increasingly entangled in a dangerous game of secrets and lies. Each meeting with Esteban became an escape from reality, where she surrendered to the pleasure of something she knew was wrong. Guilt consumed her, but Esteban's allure pushed her forward, creating a web that became harder and harder to escape. She tried to convince herself that her marriage to Ricardo still mattered, but the attraction to Esteban left her in a constant internal battle. The nights in the cabin became a refuge, a place where she could live out the fantasy without facing the consequences. Clara tried to justify her actions to herself, convincing herself that her love for Ricardo was still there. But with every hidden message, every furtive encounter with Esteban, she felt the weight of infidelity becoming more real. It was as if she were living in two parallel worlds, one where she was married and another where her passion for Esteban dictated her actions. The lie spread, and the cycle of deception seemed never-ending. As she sank deeper into this web of secrets, Clara knew that at any moment, the truth could come to light, and the consequences would be immeasurable. Esteban, on the other hand, was growing increasingly impatient. The passion they shared no longer seemed enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted Clara completely, and she knew the weight of her choices was becoming unbearable. Yet, even in the face of this mounting pressure, Clara still couldn't decide between Ricardo's safe love and Esteban's all-consuming passion. And so, she found herself lost in a sea of conflicting emotions where the truth seemed as distant as the solution to her dilemma. What had once been a series of stolen glances and discreet touches had now turned into an intense game of power and desire. Esteban, tired of being nothing more than a shadow in Clara's life, finally took action. He was no longer willing to remain on the fringes of this forbidden love. He confronted her with a choice. Either she left Ricardo to fully embrace the passion they shared, or their relationship would have to end right there. The ultimatum was set, and the weight of the decision on Clara felt even more crushing. She knew that by making this choice, a part of her life would be destroyed forever. The nights, once secret and filled with excitement, were now marked by pressure. Clara felt more torn than ever. The idea of leaving Ricardo, a man with whom she had shared so many moments, was terrifying, yet the pull toward Esteban seemed to eclipse everything else. With his intense gaze and seductive words, he demanded an immediate choice, and time seemed to slip through Clara's fingers like sand. She wanted to believe she could keep balancing both worlds, but she knew it was impossible. The truth was closing in, and she had to act. Clara's internal struggle intensified with each passing day. She knew that no matter what choice she made, it would lead to loss, pain, and perhaps even regret. Yet, at the same time, her desire for Esteban became more urgent, as if it were the only thing capable of making her feel truly alive. The dilemma was clear: continue in a marriage that felt cold and distant, or surrender to a passion that was overwhelming but built on lies and consequences. The affair between Clara and Esteban could no longer be hidden. The weight of the lies was becoming unbearable, and while Ricardo didn't yet know everything, he was beginning to sense the change in Clara's behavior. He noticed the fleeting glances, the emotional distance, the longer nights, and the absence of her usual warmth. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Clara, on the other hand, was increasingly consumed by guilt and the fear of being discovered. Esteban, in his impatience, pushed Clara to make a final decision while she sank deeper into a web of lies and broken promises. One lie piled on top of another, and Clara found herself trapped in a spiral of deception and frustration. She tried, in every way possible, to maintain the facade of a devoted wife, but inside, the emptiness grew by the day. The guilt of betraying Ricardo, of shattering his trust, was eating away at her, yet the desire for Esteban was becoming harder to control. And Esteban, despite wanting her so intensely, did not help her find a way out of this emotional prison. He wanted Clara completely, without ties, and he couldn't understand why she was still clinging to Ricardo. It was a constant pressure, an internal battle that seemed never-ending. And then, the small clues that Ricardo had been piecing together in his mind became undeniable. He sensed that something was terribly wrong, and the inevitable revelation was drawing closer. The furtive conversations, the secret meetings, the evasive looks, all of it was about to come to light, and Clara knew the price of her choices would be steep. The confrontation was inevitable, and she could no longer escape the truth that was bearing down on her. Clara was at a breaking point. Doubts consumed her, and the pressure of her choices was overwhelming. On one side was the comfort and stability of her marriage with Ricardo, a relationship built over years, but now marked by distance and a lack of passion. On the other side was Esteban, who represented an intoxicating love, but also a life of deception, mistrust, and uncertainty. The internal struggle grew more agonizing. What was worth more? The security of the familiar, or the promise of a passion that could consume everything? She began to question everything she had once believed in. Did the life she had with Ricardo still have value? Could the love she felt for him be restored? Or had her feelings for Esteban taken her past the point of no return? Clara knew that whatever decision she made would change her life forever. If she chose Esteban, she would lose the stability and comfort of her marriage, but she might finally experience a love that made her feel truly alive. If she chose Ricardo, she would have to face the weight of her betrayal and the possibility of a life without the fire Esteban had ignited in her, but at least she would no longer be living a lie. Caught in this storm of emotions, Clara felt more divided than ever. Every option seemed impossible, and she feared that no matter what path she chose, she would condemn herself to a lifetime of regret. The dilemma was clear, and she knew that whatever choice she made, there would be loss. She was about to make the decision that would define the future of her heart, and the pain that accompanied it felt unbearable. The last encounter between Clara and Esteban was marked by an intensity that seemed impossible to ignore. There was a mix of uncontrollable desire and the awareness that this would be the final chapter of something that should never have begun. Words between them were no longer necessary. Their bodies spoke for themselves, and their passion had become a bond that, at that moment, could not be broken. The fire between them was at its peak, but so was the fear of their imminent farewell. Clara knew this would be the last kiss, the last night, and that the consequences of it all would soon begin to unfold. Esteban, always so resolute, was certain that this moment marked the end of a cycle, yet at the same time, he knew it could not truly be the end of everything. The desire they shared was something so visceral that, even as the farewell loomed, he couldn't convince himself that their connection would be completely severed. For Clara, the pain of leaving Esteban was something she had yet to learn how to endure, but she also knew that from this point forward, nothing would ever be the same. The fear of the unknown loomed over her, but the decision had already been made. That kiss was not just a goodbye. It was the confirmation that everything they had lived would not be forgotten but would now become a memory that would haunt her heart. What became clear to Clara that night was that forbidden love and betrayal could not be sustained forever. The truth of the situation stood before her, and that final night with Esteban, so full of passion, also carried the weight of deep sadness. The choices had been made, and their fates, though uncertain, had been sealed. She knew that when she woke up the next morning, her life would take a course she could no longer control. Back in Ricardo's arms, Clara tried to regain a sense of normalcy, but something inside her had changed. Guilt consumed her, and the emptiness she felt beside her husband grew more unbearable with each passing day. The nights without Esteban were long and silent, and despite her efforts to reconnect with Ricardo, she knew their relationship would never be the same. The love that once existed between them seemed to have been erased by betrayal, and the memories of her moments with Esteban lingered like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. She found herself in constant inner turmoil, questioning whether she had made the right choice. Clara felt that, day by day, the distance between her and Ricardo was growing, and she could no longer deny that her passion for Esteban had been deep and transformative. But now, with a choice made, she tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing by saving her marriage. However, the scars of betrayal were there, visible in every gesture and every word, no matter how much she tried to hide them. The weight of her decision was not only emotional, but also moral. The pain of losing Esteban was unbearable, but the idea of continuing with Ricardo, living a life of lies, left her feeling utterly lost. As the days passed, Clara began to realize that the cost of her choice was higher than she had imagined. Her marriage to Ricardo, once an anchor, now felt like a prison. Guilt and regret consumed her, but the certainty that she could not turn back kept her bound to a life that no longer fulfilled her. The pain of losing Esteban was not just about his absence, but also the recognition that she would never be the same. Her journey was now marked by the feeling that in choosing security, she had lost a part of herself. Ricardo, though he had harbored suspicions, was now beginning to piece the puzzle together. Small details that had once gone unnoticed had become undeniable evidence that something was wrong. Clara's behavior, the changes in her routine, and her frequent absences began to paint a picture he could no longer ignore. He knew the truth was staring him in the face, but the pain of confronting it was almost unbearable. The man he had believed himself to be, the center of her trust, now felt like a stranger, and the lies that had woven their way into their relationship only pushed them further apart. When the inevitable confrontation came, Clara found herself cornered. The pain of admitting her betrayal was crushing, but Ricardo's demand for the truth left her with no place to hide. His accusations were harsh, each word cutting through what little remained of her self-esteem. Esteban, who had once been her refuge, now felt like a distant and unreal shadow. Clara no longer knew what was worse, the pain of losing Esteban or the agony of having irreparably destroyed her relationship with Ricardo. The truth, now fully exposed, brought to light not only the lies but also the deep scars Clara carried. She could no longer deceive herself about what she had done. The consequences of her choices were finally becoming clear, and with them came the realization that everything she had built was crumbling. There was no turning back. The lie had been undone, and Clara was now facing a new reality. The pain of betrayal manifested not only in Ricardo's words, but also in the unbearable weight of regret that consumed her from within. Clara knew that the moment to face the truth had arrived. With tears in her eyes and a heavy heart, she finally forced herself to confess her betrayal to Ricardo. The words were bitter, difficult to utter, and each syllable that left her lips seemed to widen the chasm between them. The relationship that had once felt safe and unshakable was now irreparably shattered. Though Clara felt a fleeting sense of relief for finally telling the truth, she knew it would never undo the damage she had caused. The weight of guilt pressed down on her, and she found herself utterly alone in a storm of regret and pain. Ricardo, stunned and devastated, didn't know how to react. The man he thought he knew had transformed into someone unrecognizable, and Clara's words, though painful, opened his eyes to a cruel and relentless reality. The betrayal wasn't just a breach of trust. It was a deep wound that could not be easily healed. Their farewell wasn't an exchange of kind words, but rather a difficult goodbye, laden with resentment. Clara knew that this moment marked the end of something far greater than just her relationship with Ricardo. It was the end of the woman she had once been. With her confession made and her relationship shattered, Clara found herself facing a new reality, one she had no control over. Esteban's promises, the overwhelming passion, now seemed distant and unreal. The pain of losing Ricardo was greater than she had anticipated, and the regret over her choices consumed every part of her being. What remained was a profound emptiness, a heavy awareness that her betrayal wasn't just a mistake made in a moment of weakness, but something that had permanently altered the course of her life. After the whirlwind of emotions and the destruction of what was left of her relationship with Ricardo, Clara tried, in some way, to move forward. The weight of regret still consumed her, and she felt that the past would mark her forever. Every memory of Esteban, every moment she had lived by his side, was a flame that refused to go out, and she knew she had lost something precious. However, the pain and remorse wouldn't let her rest, making her question whether the passion she had chosen was ever truly worth it. Had it been worth the cost? She now faced the harsh truth that betrayal, though intoxicating, could never fill the void she felt inside. As she attempted to rebuild her life, Clara began to realize that there was no simple answer to her dilemma. The search for redemption seemed more like an illusion than an achievable reality. How could she redeem herself when, with every step, the pain of her past choices reminded her of her mistakes? Yet, something inside her began to awaken, perhaps a spark of self-compassion or the desire to understand the depths of her actions. She knew that if she was ever to find a path to renewal, she would have to accept the consequences of her choices and, perhaps, begin rebuilding her life one piece at a time. The process of redemption was uncertain and long, and Clara understood that true change would not come from trying to erase what had happened but from embracing the lessons that betrayal and infidelity had taught her. Although the future remained unclear, she now realized that to rebuild her life, she would have to learn to live with the weight of her choices and work toward becoming a better person. If rebirth was possible, it would have to come from within, but it would be a long journey before Clara could find the peace she so desperately sought. Now that you know Clara's story and the devastating consequences of her choices, it's time to reflect. How far are you willing to go to protect your relationships and your own peace of mind? Every decision we make, no matter how insignificant it may seem, has the power to reshape the course of our lives. And infidelity, often seen as a fleeting escape, has the potential to destroy everything we've built. So the question remains, will you follow the path of temptation, risking everything for a moment of pleasure, or will you learn to build a strong and genuine foundation for your future? Remember, this isn't just about a relationship, it's about the integrity and inner peace you create for yourself. The real reward doesn't come from living a lie, but from seeking truth and authenticity, no matter how difficult that may be. If you want to keep learning and avoid the mistakes that so many have made, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll always stay ahead, ready to build stronger and healthier relationships without having to pay the price of betrayal. The choice is yours, and so is the power to change your life.